5 men vanished after a basketball game. 4 of them were found dead months later near a cabin that was fully stocked with supplies, while the 5th was never found. This is the story of the Yuba County Five. On the night of February 24th, 1978, 5 friends from Yuba County, California, climbed into a turquoise 1969 Mercury Montego and drove 50 miles north to Chico. They were headed to a college basketball game, UC Davis against Chico State, and they had a reason to be excited. The next morning, their own team, the Gateway Gators, was set to compete in a Special Olympics tournament, with a trip to Los Angeles waiting for the winners. Some of them had already laid their uniforms out on their beds the night before. The 5 men, Jack Madruga, Ted Weiher, Jack Huett, Bill Sterling, and Gary Mathias, were close friends, bonded by more than basketball. Each had an intellectual disability or a psychiatric condition, and their families affectionately called them the boys. Madruga, the only one with a reliable license and a car, always drove. He didn't like the cold. He'd never been fond of the mountains. That detail would matter later. The game ended with a Davis win. The group swung by a convenience store on their way out of town, buying soda, chocolate milk, and snacks for the ride home. The clerk remembered them, mostly because their large group had delayed her from closing up for the night. It was just before 10 p.m. That was the last confirmed sighting of all 5 men together, alive. They never made it home. By morning, panicked parents were calling the police. Search efforts began along the route the men should have taken back to Yuba City. There was nothing. No crash, no car, no sign of the Montego at all. Then 4 days later, a Forest Service ranger came forward. He'd noticed a car parked along a remote stretch of Oroville-Quincy Road, deep in the Plumas National Forest, on the night the men vanished. At the time, it hadn't seemed unusual. Locals often drove up that road to go cross-country skiing. But after seeing the missing persons bulletin, he realized what he'd seen and led deputies to the spot. The car was 70 miles from Chico, nowhere near the road home. It was stuck in a snowdrift on a dirt road that climbed toward the snow line, at an elevation where the road itself was about to be closed for winter. Inside, investigators found the wrappers from the food the men had bought, a folded road map, and their game programs. Everything suggested they had been in the car for some time after leaving the store. What didn't make sense was everything else. The car wasn't stuck badly. Investigators noted that 5 healthy young men should have been able to push it free without much trouble, and there was evidence they had tried. But instead of walking back the way they came, toward help, they seemed to have gone forward, deeper into the forest. The keys were missing. When police hot-wired the ignition, the engine started immediately. The gas tank was still a quarter full, and the undercarriage, remarkably, had no scrapes, no dents, no mud, not even on the low-hanging muffler, despite miles of rutted mountain road. Either the car had been driven with extraordinary care, or by someone who already knew the road. Madruga's family said that was impossible. He never let anyone else drive. None of the men owned heavy coats. They'd left home in light jackets, dressed for a basketball game, not a night in the Sierra Nevada. And nobody, not their families, not investigators, could explain why they would have turned off the highway onto an unfamiliar, closed mountain road in the first place. A severe snowstorm hit the area just as the search began, forcing crews to pull back. Weeks passed, then months, and through it all, 2 witness accounts stood out from the noise. The first came from a man named Joseph Shawns, who had also gotten stuck near the same spot that same night on his way to check on his cabin. around midnight, suffering the early signs of what would later be confirmed as a heart attack. He saw headlights and a group of people behind his car. Among them, he believed, a woman holding a baby. He called out for help. The voices went silent. The lights switched off. Later, he thought he remembered a truck pausing nearby before driving on, though he admitted he was fading in and out of consciousness from the pain. He survived by walking 8 miles to a lodge after his own car ran out of fuel. The second came from a woman working at a general store in Brownsville, 30 miles down the same road, the direction the men would have been heading if they'd continued on. She said 4 men matching the group's description had stopped there the day after the game, arriving in a red pickup truck. The store owner backed up her account, describing 2 of the men buying burritos and chocolate milk while the other 2 waited outside at a payphone. Investigators called her a credible witness, but no truck, no driver, and no explanation for how the men could have covered that ground ever surfaced. Then, on June 4th, nearly 4 months after the disappearance, a group of motorcyclists came across a Forest Service trailer nearly 20 miles from where the car had been abandoned. Its front window was broken. Inside, they found a body, Ted Weiher, wrapped in bedsheets, lying on a bunk. He had survived for what autopsy evidence suggested was as long as 3 months, slowly starving despite a storage shed nearby holding enough dehydrated food to last 5 men a full year. The trailer's fireplace had never been lit, even though matches and kindling sat within reach. A locker of supplies remained sealed. Weiher's shoes were never found, but Gary Mathias' sneakers were sitting inside the trailer. The following days brought more discoveries. The remains of Madruga and Sterling turned up on opposite sides of the road, 11 miles from the car, both dead of hypothermia. Huett's remains were found 2 days after that, scattered near a bush. His school recovered downhill the day after. Of Gary Mathias, there was nothing. No body, no bones, no trace, then or now. Investigators pieced together a version of events. It's believed Madruga and Sterling died first, roughly halfway through what must have been a desperate overnight walk. Huett may have died shortly after. Weiher and Mathias, it seems, reached the trailer and broke in through the window, perhaps too afraid of being arrested for burglary to use the untouched supplies stacked just feet from where Weiher was slowly dying. The C ration cans that had been opened bore marks consistent with a military-style can opener, a detail linking back to Mathias's and Madruga's army service. At some point, investigators believe Mathias left the trailer, walking out into the wilderness, perhaps to find help, perhaps for reasons no one will ever know. Some researchers believe the group simply took a wrong turn near Oroville, mistaking the mountain road for the route to Forbstown, where Mathias had friends, and got trapped by snowdrifts left behind by a Forest Service snowcat the day before. Others aren't convinced that explains the abandoned car, the untouched, almost undisturbed crime scene quality of the vehicle, or Chaunce's account of voices that went silent and lights that switched off in the dark. The case has drawn comparisons to Russia's Dyatlov Pass incident, another instance where healthy people left shelter and walked into deadly cold for reasons that still aren't understood. Investigators have never ruled out foul play. They've also never found evidence to confirm it. Gary Mathias would be in his 70s now if he's alive at all. His case file remains open with the Yuba County Sheriff's Office to this day. No one knows why 5 men turned off a highway and drove into the mountains that night. No one knows why they left a working car in a snowbank rather than push it free. And no one has ever found Gary Mathias. Not his body, not his glasses, not a single trace of where he went after he walked out of that trailer and into the trees. Thank you for watching until the end. Like and subscribe for new mysteries every week.